Climate change. The government reveals Aotearoa's first national adaptation plan, but in 200 pages, still no detail on who pays. Climate Change Minister James Shaw is live. Yet another ram raid overnight, so how is the government's crime prevention fund working out for small businesses? Apparently we've got record wage growth, have you noticed? A teeny tiny Goldie painting that could go for about the same price as an Auckland apartment is up for auction tonight. And cats in jackets and backpacks in a national park, no less, potentially catastrophic. We'll unpack it.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The National Party wants to know who will pay for the government's long-term strategy to deal with the effects of climate change. The 200-page National Adaptation Plan shows the government's priorities for the next 6 years, pulling together into one place all its efforts to adapt to the warming globe. It recognises the current rules and laws are blocking action, and the plan intends to embed climate resilience in all government policies. National's Scott Simpson was asked who should pay for damage and the cost to adapt to climate change.
Well, ultimately that's going to have to be a combination of property owners, ratepayers and taxpayers, but this plan doesn't address any of that.
Scott Simpson says it's taken the government a long time to come up with the plan. Taiwan's president has thanked visiting US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for her concrete actions to support Taiwan at a critical moment. Tsai Ing-wen says the island will not back down in the face of heightened military threats. The pair met in Taipei today as part of Ms Pelosi's visit to the island, which has drawn fierce criticism from Beijing and prompted it to announce a raft of military exercises and to summon the US ambassador. Ms Tsai says Taiwan will continue to work with the US to strengthen collaboration in security, economic development and supply chains. Jacinda Ardern says she has no plans to visit Taiwan as Prime Minister amid escalating tensions between the United States and China. Ms Ardern says she hasn't visited Taiwan and doesn't intend to, but she won't pass judgment on another's decisions.
The most important thing we need between all parties right now is dialogue and diplomacy. New Zealand will continue to call for there to be engagement and communication between both nations and those where we have seen that contested environment.
ACT's David Seymour says the Chinese Communist Party has no right to decide who can or can't visit Taipei. A union organiser says workers in some sectors are getting their biggest pay increases in decades. New figures out today from Statistics New Zealand show wages rose by 3.4%, the highest annual increase since 2008, although inflation has risen faster. Air 2 team leader Jen Natoli says employers are raising wages because they need to attract and to retain workers.
Workers are making a choice, regardless of whether or not they're in unions, to find jobs that suit them and meet their needs. And so if the wages aren't competitive, workers are walking. And so that would be my question back is, I don't think it's the wages that kill the business. If you don't have enough staff, you're going to kill your business then too, aren't you?
Jen Natoli says any wage increase that's less than the cost of living increase is essentially a pay cut. A landlord says the government's $6 million crime prevention fund is a drop in the bucket. The Takanini town centre has been hit by ram raiders 12 times in the past year. Back in May, the then Police Minister, Poto Williams, announced a $6 million fund to help small businesses hit by ram raiders. A landlord, Bruce Wallace, says it would probably cost $1 million to fund security measures just for the town centre. The Education Minister says he's concerned the transition to the new mega polytech was heading off track, but is now more confident it can meet its deadlines. Te Pukenga has been beset with difficulties as it works to bring polytechnics, institutes of technology and industry training organisations together by January the 1st. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Te Pukenga's chief executive remains on unexplained personal leave. There's a projected $110 million deficit and concerns about job losses. The organisation's board chair, Murray Strong, confirmed this morning the leadership has apologised to the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, and to staff for its handling of the transition so far. Mr Hipkins says he was concerned about Te Pukenga's progress, but is confident the transition is back on track.
New Zealand's had its wettest July since records began. NIWA has released its monthly climate summary and says July was also the fourth warmest month on record. Rainfall levels were 149% higher than normal and temperatures were 1.3 degrees above average. A second Wellington mayoral candidate has put election advertising up earlier than is allowed. Some of Tory whānau's posters went up in error, but despite criticising Paul Eagle when he refused to remove digital billboards in June, she's not taking her posters down.
Admittedly, I was critical of the other candidates. I kind of had to have a bit of a reality check. We're at that part of the campaign where I'm up against two people who have very public profiles. So I actually just made the call, you know what, I'm going to lean in and I'm going to level the playing field.
Wellington City Council has told Tory whānau she's breaching its election hoardings rules, but there's little more it can do as the rules aren't enforceable. And a car crash has blocked lanes on Auckland's southwestern motorway. Multiple northbound lanes and the right southbound lane are blocked near Portage Road overbridge. Another crash is blocking the right northbound lane near the Nielsen Street off-ramp. To sport, and New Zealand athletes are on course for a possible record Commonwealth Games medal haul, with several more gold medal performances on the cards for tomorrow. Several medal hopes in Birmingham are in action overnight and tomorrow morning, as Bridget Tunnicliffe reports from Birmingham.
Later tonight, Ben Oliver and Sam Gaze, a 2018 gold medalist, will be competing in the mountain bike event. In squash, Joelle King will compete for bronze before world number 2 men's player Paul Cole places gold medal match at 6 a.m. David Leite will be looking to defend his Commonwealth Games weightlifting title from around 5:30. Lewis Clareburt could complete a fairy tale in Birmingham when he competes in the 200 individual medley just after 6 tomorrow. Soon after that, Maddie Weshi will be in a good position for a medal in the shot put after qualifying 3rd overall.
The All Blacks captain Sam Cane believes there's not a whole lot they can do to improve upon to get back to... I'll start that again. The All Blacks captain Sam Cane believes there's not a whole lot they need to improve upon to get back to top form, despite having lost 4 of their last 5 tests. The Under Fire side begin their rugby championship campaign against the Springboks in South Africa on Sunday morning. But Cane maintains there's no sense of panic in the camp.
It may seem like there's a lot to fix from the outside potentially, but in camp we've got a couple of really clear focuses, and often when you get what you say like the big rocks of a 4-pack right, a lot of those other smaller things which may seem like issues sort of sort themselves out.
And Kiwis 5/8 Te Maire Martin has signed a 3-year deal with the Warriors. That's the news.
Coastal land is eroding at speed.
It was basically ripped out from under us. The stress and the toll it takes on your daily living is horrendous.
The globe is spinning at a new pace.
Even by that little amount, that if those few milliseconds add up over a few years, you have to have a leap second when we have the new year each year, otherwise we might start getting the time wrong.
And the race for medals continues.
The villages are really buzzing. Everybody's just embracing it. It is fantastic and everybody's buzzing, looking forward to their part.
A personal best. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. From Northland to Waikato, including Bay of Plenty, partly cloudy, isolated showers mainly in the east, clearing tomorrow. Areas of fog tomorrow morning. From Waitomo to Manawatu, including the central high country. Scattered rain spreading north this afternoon, then easing to isolated showers in the evening and becoming mostly fine tomorrow. From Horowhenua to Wellington, including Wairarapa, mainly fine. The odd shower in Horowhenua this afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud clearing tonight. A possible shower or two in Gisborne. Fine weather is forecast for Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Otago and Southland, showers about the south coast, clearing this evening. High cloud tomorrow with possible rain around midday in Southland, Clutha, Otago Lakes and Stewart Island. Bulla and Westland, scattered showers clearing this evening but returning to Westland tomorrow. Showers are forecast for Fiordland, turning to rain tomorrow. Some are heavy and thundery falls are possible. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, mainly fine. A few showers until this evening. The time is 9 minutes past 5. I'll have the latest news headlines and a traffic update for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government's unveiled its blueprint for dealing with the unavoidable consequences of climate change, including the likelihood whole communities could literally have to move to higher ground. The 200-page National Adaptation Plan pulls together a to-do list of about 120 actions, including new legislation to deal with the detail of managed retreat. It lays out some stark realities. 1 in 7 of us, that's about 675,000 people across Aotearoa, live in areas prone to flooding, and that equates to about $100 billion worth of houses. Yep, $100 billion. But the big questions of who pays and how are still a long way from being answered. Climate Change Minister James Shaw in a moment. But first, here's reporter Hamish Cardwell.
Floods, fires, droughts and marine heatwaves. Aotearoa has been hammered by it all in recent years. To the rescue? A 200-page document released by the government today, which sets out a plan for coping with the inevitable effects of climate change. Owhero Bay on Wellington's south coast is in the firing line, and local resident Eugene Doyle says for communities like his, there is no time to waste.
My criticism is on the timing of what's been done and the lack of serious money to actually drive this forward.
There is nothing much in the way of major new policy in the National Adaptation Plan. It details more than 120 points of action it has already started or intends to in the next 6 years to build climate resilience. Shaw says successive governments have known about climate change for decades and done very little, and it is now forced to play catch-up.
Look, I am the first person to say how frustrated I am at the incredibly slow pace of government in responding to the climate crisis. And so, I think that is tremendously frustrating. But now that we've actually got a statutory plan in place, I think that you will see the momentum pick up.
Well, better late than never. 5 years into this government's term and they're finally addressing the adaptation plan. But the big question is really left unanswered, which is who pays? And that's not addressed in the plan.
That's National Party climate spokesperson Scott Simpson pointing out that despite the draft version of the plan asking for the public's input, the plan is silent on the trillion-dollar question of who bears the cost. Nervous waterfront homeowners will have to wait until next year for further developments from the massive RMA reforms to find out how much central and local government will be pitching in. Political finger-pointing aside, University of Waikato environmental planning professor Ian White says having a plan like this is a milestone in itself. He says it has enough teeth to hold whoever is in power to account.
This multi-decadal process of risk assessments, progress reports, it's got some built-in what we call commitment devices. So it looks like it can hold a level of accountability to the plan that will carry on regardless of which government happens to be in power at the time.
And with about 1 in 7 people living in areas prone to flooding, the country has a lot to grapple with.
Well, joining us now is Climate Change Minister James Shaw. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
So, obviously, you believe we've got a climate crisis, but the question of who pays for adaptation and retreat, it's not being addressed until next year, right? If we have this emergency, why can't you answer that question faster?
Well, ultimately, there's not one lever that we're going to pull when it comes to funding and financing. So I think in the package you were talking about how, when we were consulting on the draft plan, some of the questions that we were asking was about that balance of both risk and cost across, property owners themselves, their insurance companies, their banks, local authorities and central government. But there will be different ways of dealing with that. So, for example, one of the first things that we're doing right now is looking at flood risk insurance, which, obviously with the number of flood events that we've had in recent days, I think it's something like 5 separate flooding events just in the last 20 days of July alone. We know that that is a very clear and present danger. As we deal with that, we'll then be learning lessons that we can apply to other forms of climate-related risk as well, such as droughts and fires and so on. So, part of this will kind of land in the insurance industry, part of it will land at central government, often the things that are most closest in time. Central government tends to pick up the tab through emergency management and civil defence.
I understand that, and people would accept it's not going to land in one place, but they want more detail about who's paying for what, right? And the issue with this is potentially you won't be the climate change minister, or this government may not be the government in the time frame that you're going to deliver this information, and then what?
Well, I think that speaks to the importance of the framework that we put in place through the Zero Carbon Act in our first term. And the reason why we were working so hard to build bipartisan consensus is that, as Ian White was saying, earlier on the show, this is a multi-decade challenge and it has to survive multiple changes of government. And so, we're kind of laying the foundations for that. I hope to be obviously able to execute as much of that program as possible. But ultimately, the next government, whatever form it takes, will be picking up the tab. And we know that, picking up the baton. And we know that we've got cross-party support in the House for that work program.
So this plan consolidates a lot of stuff, right? A to-do list, 120 actions. How many of them are new today announced?
I don't have a percentage of those. I mean, it is really important, I think, to show the work that we have been doing over the last few years and how it comes together and supports the overall program. I can give you an example of kind of 2 or 3 things that kind of were new that are being announced that are going to happen over the course of the next sort of 12 months or so. There's got to be a national adaptation plan for health because one of the risks identified is to human health, in particular changes in disease vectors as temperatures rise. The Treasury is going to be doing its first ever climate fiscal report, looking at both the economic and the broader fiscal kind of forecasting of all of this. That will then start to affect future budget policy statements and so on. And the EQC is going to be releasing the first part of their information portal and putting this information out there for communities to be able to use themselves. So, right. There are a lot of those kinds of things that we are doing, particularly with an emphasis on making better data and information available to communities, like the one that Eugene was talking about on the radio earlier.
Okay, there's a lot in this, so I want to whip through a couple of things pretty quickly if I can. Focusing on putting standard climate information on land information reports, LIMS, what will they show?
Well, again, I don't have the final policy detail of that, but, there has been a bit of a haphazard approach in various councils around the country. Many of them haven't actually succeeded in being able to do what they think is the right thing. And so we really want to be able to backstop local authorities to make sure that
you will make it a mandatory requirement for uniform information about climate change risks to be on a LIM report.
We're not going to make it mandatory to put the information on the LIM report, but we want to ensure that councils are protected when they want to put that information on, and we're ensuring that standard information is available so that you can compare apples with apples in different parts of the country.
Okay, you want to incorporate resilience and performance requirements into the building code for new houses so that they can better stand up to climate change. Yes. Have you had any information about how much that is going to add to construction in terms of cost of a standard house?
Well, I think there's probably a question for the Minister for Building and Construction who's in charge of that work program. We do know that when you lift the building code, that actually that amortises costs right out across the whole sector. So if you look at the experience of the United Kingdom, who did this, and every 2 years they lifted the standard a little bit more, the costs were really marginal. But now a new build house in the UK has the same quality standard as a new build house in Sweden or Norway, and so we know that there are costs that are involved in continuing to have substandard housing,
right.
Both in terms of human health, energy costs, and and, of course, the resilience to other effects of climate change.
I want to get through 2 or 3 things, Minister, so if we can do it quickly. How could you incentivise resilience in private housing builds? Would you subsidise something? If so, what?
Again, that's probably a question for the Minister of Building and Construction, but...
it's your National Adaptation Plan, and one of the things you're investigating is incentives for resilience. You must have some ideas.
Well, my job, Lisa, is to draw together a number of different agencies and a number of different ministers' work programs to be able to ensure that we do have an all-of-government approach here. Many of the actions that are in this haven't yet made it to Cabinet for final policy decisions, so they're work programs either that are ongoing or that are just getting started.
Move on to flood insurance that you mentioned. Government's exploring options for home flood insurance. Does that mean it's going to be a government-backed scheme for people who are uninsurable or the cost is prohibitive for them?
Again, government hasn't made final decisions on that, but we do know that obviously flood risk insurance is increasing. We're seeing more frequent and more severe flood events, and that cost is increasing both for insurance companies and for people who are in those properties. And so there does need to be some form of transition to a more sustainable situation, because we know that those flood events are only going to get more frequent and more severe in coming years.
Okay, an assessment tool for resilience in buildings, public buildings, libraries and other establishments. Will that mean it's mandatory to bring your building up to climate change code like you do with an earthquake assessment?
Not yet, but we do want to make sure that all new builds do take account of the risks that that particular area will be exposed to, and that will be different in different parts of the country.
Appreciate your time, Minister. Thank you for joining us. That is the Climate Change Minister, James Shaw. It is 5:20. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai Ofakaro would love your feedback on that one. So it's a 200-page document and lays out 120 actions that are going to take place. But in discussing that with the Minister, there are no details of who's paying. That won't come until the end of next year. And again, some of the detail there is yet to be fleshed out. Your thoughts, text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines now. Ko Iwi Anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The country's first long-term strategy for adapting to climate change has been revealed today. Climate Change Minister James Shaw told Checkpoint funding and financing will come from a variety of sources, such as the insurance industry and central government. Taiwan's president has thanked visiting US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for her concrete actions to support Taiwan at a critical moment, and says Taiwan will continue to work with the US to strengthen collaboration in security and economic development. China has warned of grave consequences for the visit. It claims the self-governing island as part of its territory, and Jacinda Ardern says she has no plans to visit Taiwan as Prime Minister. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon says families are being let down by a government without a proper plan for addressing the cost of living crisis, as new figures show wage growth is trailing inflation. The Education Minister admits he's been concerned the transition to the new mega polytech was heading off track. Te Pukenga's CEO remains on unexplained personal leave. There's a projected $110 million deficit, and there are also concerns about job losses. And British researchers looking into claims that digital devices can wreck memory skills have found the opposite is true. They found that storing trivial information like shopping lists and phone numbers on digital devices frees up the mind for more interesting or valuable tasks. That's good news. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Auckland, the crash near State Highway 20's Portage Road overbridge continues to block a northbound lane, but traffic is getting past. It's just slowing people down. And in Wellington, there is a strong wind warning on Rimutaka Hill. I'll have the latest news headlines and another traffic update for you at about 40 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, Eho. The apologies just keep on coming from the leadership of the new mega polytech. First it was a mea culpa to staff, now it's to the Minister of Education. Te Pūkenga has been beset with difficulties as it works to bring polytechnics, institutes of technology and industry training organisations together by January 1st. Its CEO, earning up to $13,000 a week, remains on unexplained personal leave. There's a projected $110 million deficit and concerns about how the transition's being managed. Furthermore, it won't be until Christmas that hundreds of staff around the country will find out whether or not they still have a job. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, filed this report.
I'm here today with Peter Winder, who's our acting chief executive, who's stepped into this role at a relatively difficult juncture.
That's the chairperson of Te Pūkenga, Murray Strong, admitting the challenges as he and the acting CEO appeared at Select Committee this morning.
We're simply not where we need to be in terms of the transition pathway. We've apologised to the Minister and to the staff of Te Pūkenga for not making the progress we'd expected, where we find ourselves in terms of our current position, and we've also outlined the work that's now required to get us where we need to.
The new institute's on a cost-cutting exercise as it tries to claw back a projected $110 million deficit. Peter Winder says that's a work in progress.
We need to do everything we can to actually balance the books.
Also hitting the headlines is CEO Stephen Town remaining on leave, but Mr Strong was reluctant to go into any details.
The chief executive requested personal leave. That's offered at the discretion of the chair, and I agreed to it.
So Mr Town initiated the discussion to go on personal leave.
I'm not going to comment any further on personal leave.
Staff had been unhappy with the consultation and felt their expertise and experience had been ignored, prompting an apology from the chair of the board. A new process on what the staffing structure will look like will start in a few weeks' time, but it will be a broad consultation focusing on the executive team, not positions in the wider organisation.
It's been signalled from the very beginning of the reform process that there were going to be new jobs created and existing roles disestablished.
National MP Penny Simmons says it's a stressful time.
I've had numerous staff coming to me absolutely wrought with anxiety over what's going to be happening to them, and they still won't know on the 1st of January.
And she's unimpressed with the general level of information offered to the committee.
I think they refused to answer a lot of the questions that should have been answered. For example, we asked them to be accountable for what was happening with the chief executive, and they refused to answer it.
ACT leader David Seymour says the problem is with the ideological drive towards centralisation and defended Mr Town.
Stephen Town was a very good guy at Auckland Council. Clearly something's very wrong. Personally, I'm worried about him, but we've got to think about all those people at Polytechs, all those people who work at Polytechs and study there that are in no man's land.
The Minister, Chris Hipkins, has already said he wants the deficit reduced and the operational plan sorted.
Look, I am concerned that the process was heading off track. I am confident now that it's getting back on track.
Murray Strong says the acting CEO, Peter Winder, would lead the transition period until the end of the year. But who would be doing that come January 2023 had yet to be determined.
It may not feel like it, but wages are rising at their fastest rate since late 2008, whipped on by labour shortages in almost every sector. All the pundits predicted we'd see record low unemployment as a result, but unexpectedly the number of out-of-work New Zealanders actually rose slightly in the last quarter. Ruth Hill looks into what's going on.
By the time Kushla's 3% pay increase hit her bank account earlier this year, it had already been completely gobbled up by inflation of 6.9%, the highest in 3 decades. The Auckland care and support worker says she loves her clients. They're like family. But she doesn't know how much longer she can afford to do her job.
Yeah, the support workers who have a second job, who work during the day, being a care and support worker, and have a night shift job. Just to get by,
New figures out today from Statistics New Zealand show wages rose by 3.4%, the highest annual increase since late 2008, although that's still well short of inflation. Moreover, it's not evenly distributed. Council of Trade Unions economist Craig Rennie says while workers in construction and transport have scored big increases, clerical and education workers have gone backwards.
A third of workers didn't see a pay rise at all last year, and only 26% of workers saw a pay rise above 5%. So we're very definitely missing the wage part of the wage price spiral that some economists keep talking about.
Almost every sector, from construction to agriculture, health, manufacturing and hospitality, is crying out for workers, skilled or otherwise. Sanford Chief Executive Peter Reedy says the fishing company has weathered some tough times in the last couple of years, with the overseas labour market drying up completely. He's hopeful conditions will ease now the borders have reopened.
I think there is still going to be a reasonably substantial lag, and I don't think that there is going to be an overnight magic wand waved and all of a sudden we've got access to people. So it is going to take time. I do think it will improve, but I'd rather have it all happening quite a bit quicker than it is.
Is there a risk that some businesses, squeezed by rising costs and wage demands, will simply give up and go under or shift offshore? ETU team leader Jen Natoli, who works with organisers in the manufacturing sector, says employers are raising wages because they know they need to attract and retain workers.
Actually, you don't have a business if you don't have workers working. And workers are making a choice, regardless of whether or not they're in unions, to find jobs that suit them and meet their needs. And so if the wages aren't competitive, workers are walking. And so that would be my question back is, I don't think it's the wages that kill the business. If you don't have enough staff, you're going to kill your business then too, aren't you?
Due to the labour shortage, it had been widely expected that unemployment would hit a record low. In fact, the jobless rate edged up to 3.3% in the 3 months to the end of June from 3.2%. Those of us with jobs worked longer hours, with the number of people working full-time, 30 hours or more a week, increasing by 22,000 over the quarter. Unemployment and underutilisation rates for Māori, Pacific and Asians, as well as young people, continued to fall. Does this suggest that everyone who wants a job can now get a job? Hayes Recruitment Managing Director Adam Shapley says employers know they're competing in a global market.
The key thing that will ease this will be an increase in the pool of talent in New Zealand. Otherwise, we're just going to be shifting people around from one job to another, potentially ever-increasing circles before it becomes unsustainable.
Adam Shapley says if we want everyone to have a fair share of the pie, we need a bigger pie. And that means growing the pool of workers by investing in the next generation.
It's 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa NINA called Giles Beckford joining us live from the Wellington studio. OK, we've had Ruth telling us about rising wages and you're going to bring us back down to earth with interest rates and go.
That's what I'm here for, Kira, to you, Lisa. Yes, wages is, of course, domestically generated price pressure, and that's something that the Reserve Bank feels far more comfortable being able to tackle, and the way it tackles that is essentially raising interest rates. The aim, of course, is to choke off local demand, slow things down in the economy, trying to find the balance between allowing the economy to grow, but actually getting inflation back within its target band. Now, 7.4% for inflation, certainly much higher than the RBNZ would ever have thought. It will see these numbers, leaving aside the employment side, the jobs, but it will see the wages side as something that it needs to target. It's a red-hot labour market. It will move by increasing the official cash rate. It meets in a couple of weeks' time, and I expect that one of the business team in 2 weeks today will be sitting here saying, golly gosh, another 50 basis point rise in the official cash rate, taking it to 3%. Expectations amongst some economists are that it will reach 4% by the end of the year. There are 2 more reviews after the one in a couple of weeks. So that will be 4%. Somewhere between 3.75%, 4% seems to be the upper limit at this stage. The question is, how much further does the RBNZ go in trying to bring down inflation, get it back within the band? And this is where the balancing act comes into play. All we can say is most people are thinking perhaps it will ease off and will then early next year start thinking a little bit more carefully about how much, if at all, it raises that cash rate.
So tomorrow, Giles, we're expecting the draft report from the Commerce Commission on building supplies. This is sort of Mark 2, supermarkets first and now this, yeah?
Exactly. Pip was telling me, the producer, that we're quite excited by this. hold your horses, because I think that this may be once again a little bit disappointing. I have to say that the first two market studies didn't really set the world on fire. The complaints that were in the drafts, in the submissions to this report, were essentially that the scope of the inquiry is too narrow. It excluded, for instance, electrical fittings, plumbing, steel framing, which are not insignificant parts of house building. So Fletcher Building estimated that, in fact, the inquiry's terms of reference probably covered only about 8 to 10% of the cost of a house. And so the critics are saying, look, there's the cost of land, there's the regulatory issues such as consents and the RMA. What are the barriers to getting into the market? The Commerce Commission's should be looking at that, and also suggesting that in the end, that perhaps it needs to be looking at distribution. That, in the same way that we were seeing in the grocery study, between the retailers and the wholesalers and the links there, they're suggesting similar sorts of issues within the building industry that need to be looked at. It's a draft report. It will go back out for more discussions for the rest of the year. Final report due in early December.
OK, Giles, we're expecting gold medal speed for the markets, please.
Oh, stonking performance. Fifth day in a row for the local share market, up 1.5%. 3-month high. Should note that A2 milk up 9% on the back of rumours that it's close to getting US approval for infant formula sales. New Zealand dollar 62.6 US cents and 90.2 Australian.
Thank you, Giles. That is Giles Beckford joining us live from Wellington. Some residents enduring the rotten stench from Bromley's wastewater plant now want Christchurch City Council to pay for paint discoloration, which is affecting their properties. Testing of homes in neighbouring areas has shown lead paint on some properties has reacted to hydrogen sulphide coming from the foul-smelling plant. Adam Burns reports.
Hayley Lewillier only bought her new Brighton property at the end of last year. Not only has she and her family endured the foul stench from neighbouring Bromley, discoloration and bubbling in areas of her newly painted home has added further woe. She says scrubbing the areas proved to be a futile exercise.
We did clean the front door area when we noticed it building up, and it did come off with soap and water, but it was back within a few weeks. The paintwork seems to be kind of bubbling, and it's not just discoloration, there's damage there.
A private insurance claim was declined with environmental damage pinpointed as the cause. Miss Lewillier says a paint retailer also told her it was not a paint issue. She suspects the staining was possibly a result of the wastewater plant, in which the Christchurch City Council should be chipping in.
Or subsidising the cost of cleaning. It's not cheap to get your house commercially cleaned, and obviously maintenance on houses is expensive anyway, just for regular maintenance. I don't think we should be out of pocket because of environmental issues that have happened out of our control.
The council commissioned testing of some homes in neighbouring areas experiencing discoloration of the cladding. The report released on Friday shows about 2/3 of homes had a likely reaction between hydrogen sulphide from the plant and lead in the paint. It says the discoloration is only temporary. Discoloration of the remaining homes was related to mould, and residents should use a chlorine solution to wash the areas. Don Gould, who has been advocating for stench-hit residents, says some may take it up with the small claims court.
I expect we will see a flood of small claims coming through against the council unless they're actually a lot more proactive to address the problems that are obviously facing those residents financially.
There have been reports of residents conducting independent cladding reports. Don Gould says he was not surprised residents were facing issues.
We know from the early on air quality testing that there were large amounts of methylmercaptan, which is what's causing your sickness problems, and hydrogen sulphide, which is what's causing the problem with the paintwork, particularly the lead paint. The hydrogen sulphide attacks the lead paint that is underneath the acrylic paint.
Councillors agreed at a meeting today for another report to be done on whether it should offer a free clean-up to affected residents.
Taking a domestic moggy on a walkabout in one of our national parks could have catastrophic consequences. That's the message from the Department of Conservation after a couple of Aucklanders were spotted taking their cats onto Mount Taranaki. Well, joining us now is DOC Senior Ranger Dave Rogers. Dave, to use a very Auckland expression, WTF, Dave?
Yeah, exactly. Kia ora. People don't realise it's actually an offence to take domestic animals into the park, so that presents problems for us when it occurs.
Paint me a picture, describe the scene that was discovered with these cats and how they were being transported, all the rest of it.
Yep. Okay. One of our rangers at our visitor centre was informed that there were people in the car park getting cats ready. They were walking them around the car park and getting them ready to take them tramping. And so they had two cats, and they put coats on these cats, and then they put them into their backpacks, and were getting ready to head off when our ranger intervened and advised them that they couldn't be doing that. So. Yeah.
It feels like you're telling me porkies, Dave. Seriously? Were the cats on leads or what?
Yes, the cats had leads. Yes, it's serious. They're not the only animals we've had recently that have been brought into the park. We've had bunny rabbits brought into the park in plastic containers and put into packs so they could take them walking. We've had a parrot recently brought, and the woman wanted to carry the parrot around on her shoulder, and of course dogs are our biggest issue. Dogs continually, we're dealing with dogs being brought into the park.
Dave, who are these people? I mean,
look, they're a mix of people. Most of them are animal lovers, and that's the main point there. But they come from all over the country, and they're all different walks of life. So, they're just animal lovers who can't be, want to be apart from their animals, so they take them with them.
So what were they thinking that the cats would be doing? Just trotting along beside them on part of the walk, or roaming free?
Look, the way the intent or the understanding was they would either just have them in their backpacks poking their head out, or put them on leads and let them walk along the track while they were walking.
Now, in a simple way that everyone can understand, why is this not a good idea?
Right, okay. Like any domestic animal, they've still got that installed predatory instinct in them. And, of course, they can create harm for our native species that we're there, our native wildlife species. Dogs particularly. In my time, I've seen 3 kiwi killed from dogs around car parks. So it's a real problem. Cats will feed on lizards, they'll feed on insects, all species that are protected, and with their predatory behaviour, any ground-dwelling bird species is definitely under threat from them. Rabbits, we've had rabbits brought in, as I said, and then they'll browse on the native vegetation. And of course, the parrots, if we had trouble with parrots is if there's a number of them, they'll drive the native species out. So, yeah.
Dave, just very quickly, what did these people say when they were told, no cats?
Most of them, particularly these oddball animals, like cats and rabbits and that, they genuinely don't realise that they can't do that. Dogs, we get some that plead innocent and didn't know, and then we get others that just are quite ignorant and they don't see why they can't have their dogs there. But, for good reason, that they can't be in there.
Roger that. Thanks, Dave. That is Dave Rogers, who is a DOC Senior Ranger. Don't take your cat into a national park, or your dog, or any number of other domestic animals. It is 14 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And if you're wanting to check out those cats and how they were dressed and transported, you can go to our webpage. We've got some photos of them in their little coats and backpacks. And if you want to send us some feedback on the show, do text us on 2101, or you can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get our skates on. It's time for the headlines. Here's Evie.
Ina koe Lisa. The National Party wants to know who'll pay for the government's long-term strategy to deal with the effects of climate change. The plan, which was unveiled today, doesn't say who should pay for damage or the cost of adapting to climate change. A union organiser says workers in some sectors are getting their biggest pay increases in decades. New figures out today from Statistics New Zealand show wages rose by 3.4%, the highest annual increase since 2008, although inflation has risen faster. There are 6,440 new community cases of COVID-19 reported today. 704 people are in hospital and there are 26 more deaths. Another ward in Southland Hospital has been closed to visitors due to an increase in COVID-19 exposure events. A spokesperson for Te Whatu Order, Southern, says visiting is now temporarily suspended for the surgical ward. People in the US state of Kansas have voted to maintain a constitutional right to abortion. The President, Joe Biden, says the decision, in what is a deeply conservative state, shows the majority of Americans agree women should have access to abortion. And Forest and Bird says a draft plan to protect sharks needs more work and says the law allows the unnecessary killing and discarding of sharks, which can have a knock-on effect for ocean environments. Forest and Bird is encouraging the public to make submissions for the plan, which closes in the middle of September. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Christchurch, State Highway 76, Port Hills Road is currently closed to eastbound traffic between Chapman's Road and State Highway 74 interchange because of a burst water main. In Wellington, there's a strong wind warning in place for Rimutaka Hill, and in Auckland, one northbound lane near Portage Road overbridge on State Highway 20 is still blocked by a crash. That's also causing heavy congestion on Massey Road. I'll update you with the latest news and weather at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. The New Zealand team are hoping to get their hands on yet more gold on day 6 of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. A number of strong medal chances loom, several of those likely to be in contention for gold. Well, joining me down with all the details is sports reporter Clay Wilson. Before we get on to our prospects, let's wrap up. What's the latest, Clay, in terms of our medal haul and winners?
Yeah, well, it's been such a great start, obviously, to the Games for New Zealand, so it felt a bit strange, really, to wake up this morning and not see them just ticking up again. But we did still...
We're getting greedy, Clay, that's what you're saying.
We are getting a little bit greedy based on the first 4 days. We did still win 2 bronze. The lawn bowls women's 4, they won bronze. And then 21-year-old pole vaulter Imogen Eris. Now, this is an event, obviously, we've had some success in, right? But most people, well, we all associate it with Eliza McCartney, and she's had her injury issues. And while she's been out and working her way back, a couple of young females have made their way through here in New Zealand. Imogen Eris and Olivia McTaggart, they were both in that final this morning. In the end, it was Imogen who edged Olivia for the bronze medal. And it was something of an emotional medal for Imogen Eris. Her dad, Barney, he passed away almost a couple of years ago with cancer, unfortunately, and they were very close. He was at all her events, really a number one supporter, and here's what she had to say about that after her medal this morning.
I don't know, it's so special. After my dad passed 2 years ago, I promised that I'd just make him proud, and I feel like I've done more than that today. So yeah, my dad's brother and sister were here today, and my dad's auntie and all of his family were here. So yeah, to have everyone here is so special.
Yeah, so incredibly special and nice to hear from her. Hey, what have we got to look forward to?
Well, a whole lot coming. Most of it's tomorrow morning, and I'll give you the details on that. But there is one, if you want to stay up a little bit later tonight, around 10:30, 11 o'clock, the men's mountain biking. And unfortunately, Anton Cooper has had to pull out. He's been a casualty to COVID, and he's, won a gold medal and a silver medal in the mountain biking. But Sam Gay's the defending champion's back, and people will probably remember the last Commonwealth Games. There was a little bird that got flipped in an incident in that race. But I mean, Sam Gaze came back and won that race, and I think it goes to show how good a rider he is, and he's definitely
he
up.
He had a puncture, didn't he, and had to pull off to the side and was a bit upset.
And Anton carried on down the course, and Sam wasn't too happy about that in the heat of the moment, and sort of flipped a gesture that sometimes we can do in frustration. So that's about 10:30, 11 o'clock tonight. And then if you want to get up early in the morning, about 5:30 is the time to set your alarm. Starting off with David Leety in the weightlifting. He won a really great gold medal on the Gold Coast in the men's 105 kilo plus division. He was 5th at the Tokyo Olympics, so working his way up and hopefully a good chance of defending that. And then Lewis Klebert, we're back to the pool. He's already picked up those two gold medals that are pretty good games, hasn't he? And this time he's in the 200 individual medley. The final should be around 6:30, and
that's more respectable. You could brew a coffee, get up for the final.
Yeah, I think so. For most people, that's a reasonably.
I love the athletics, Clay. So what are our prospects?
Well, Hamish Kerr, high jump. He obviously made the final in Tokyo at the Olympics last year. Then he won a bronze at the World Indoors. That was really a statement performance for him. Now, he missed the final at the World Champs a couple of weeks ago, but he is peaking for this. Then we got Maddie Weshi in her famous Prada sunglasses, the good luck charms she said that she wears when she's throwing, and she's been in great form. She was 6th in Tokyo, she was 7th at the World Champs, and obviously we've had the retirement of Dame Valerie Adams, and Maddie's really stepped into that void, and this is her chance, really. I think she qualified with the third best throw to have her first significant international success. And then hopefully we're going to have an athlete in a 100-metre final with Zoe Hobbs. She's got to get through a very tough semi-final, but she's coming off a semi-final at the World Champs where she once again, I think for about the 4th or 5th time this year, broke her Oceania and New Zealand record. She was the 5th fastest in the heats. She's got a very tough semi-final, the world record holder from Jamaica and 5-time Olympic champ, I think, Elaine Thompson-Herah, and the defending champ also from Trinidad and Tobago is in that, and only the top 2 go through, but there is a spot for the next 2 fastest, and the form that Zoe's in, you'd have to say that she's still a pretty good chance of getting in that final. And that would be great to see a New Zealander in a 100-metre final on such a stage like that. We haven't seen it for a little while.
And so far, Clay, the moment that sticks in your head the most?
Well, I was thinking about this, and little Axel, Aaron Gates' son, doing the lap of honour, wasn't it great? He was
on the front of the bike.
Bit bewildered, but a great moment, I'm sure, for that family to look back on.
Yeah,
in due course.
Really amazing. Thanks, Clay. That's Clay Wilson there. So still lots to keep your eye out for in the Commonwealth Games. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoints on RNZ National. Another ram raid, this time 5 youths, the youngest just 12, smashing into a storefront in Auckland overnight. A car ploughed into the Royal Oak Liquor Centre. The police caught 3 young people at the scene and 2 nearby. Back in May, the then Police Commissioner, Poto Williams, announced a $6 million crime prevention fund to help small businesses hit by ram raiders. But as Mohammed Ala Fishat reports, many retailers haven't heard a thing, and only a handful so far in Auckland have had any funding at all to beef up their security.
About 3 this morning, 5 youths aged between 12 and 15 ram raided the liquor centre in Royal Oak, its 3rd smash in recent months. The owner says they just fixed the door last week.
They break all the front side, like all the glass doors, all the wall. So we need to fix the wall, and we keep all the boxes, all the stock on the other side, so it's all damaged.
Ram raid after ram raid costs victims a small fortune in repairs, increasing insurance premiums and lost business. TJ Handcrafted Jewelers in Auckland's Botany is one of those hit. They're still closed a month after a daylight theft in which 2 men used hammers to smash display counters and grab 3 to 4 kilograms of 22 to 24 karat gold. Owner TJ Hadaden says he hopes to install new glass this weekend, and he's fed up. He says he's heard very little about the funding.
I heard it will help you to add bars to your shop and so forth, but we're inside the mall, so it's not always easy to implement those changes.
TJ says the crime waves could also change how gold and jewellery are displayed.
Those are very high value items. We will no longer be able to trade these ones. We will have to remove them from display completely, and for the diamonds and other New Zealand gold, like the 9-carat gold, however high value, like heavy items, again, these items we will just have to put imitation.
Takanini Town Centre has had 12 ram raid incidents in the past year alone. Its landlord, Bruce Wallace, says the Crime Prevention Fund is a drop in the bucket.
I think the $6 million fund really is just a political announcement to say we acknowledge it wouldn't address the problem. Like I said here, we've probably seen a 300% increase this year as opposed to maybe 18 months to 2 years ago.
Bruce Wallace says it would probably cost $1 million to fund security measures just for the Takanini Town Centre. And that's not necessarily the answer.
One thing that we wouldn't want is New Zealand being surrounded by bollards. And we've got areas in New Zealand where bollards and roller grills and security perspex and things like that are quite heavily installed in shops, to the extent that even shopkeepers got baseball bats. But that doesn't solve them from being robbed.
The Police Minister Chris Hipkins in a statement says 5 shops have had funding for security, and police are working towards funding another 15 to 20 shops. Stores themselves can't apply for the fund. Instead, the police handpick shops and contact them. Mr. Hipkins says for each assessment, the police offer advice on shop layout, and eventually an estimated 500 retailers are expected to qualify. The police say the program is in a trial phase and more retailers will be contacted over the next 8 to 10 weeks. Indian community leader and advocate for crime prevention, Sunny Koshal, says the progress is too slow.
This is extremely difficult for the dairy owners and business owners to access the funding. First of all, there is no awareness. We do not know the criteria. We do not know the eligibility and how these funds are made available. What is the application process? The police has not yet informed us. We have been asking police for a long time. They have not yet asked. That's why I'm saying this is an example of policy by press release, and it's getting frustrating.
Sunny Koshal says businesses are already turning to lenders to fund extra security themselves. The police say the 5 youths who targeted Royal Oak have been referred to Youth Aid on charges of burglary and unlawful taking of a motor vehicle.
People are flocking to an Auckland auction room tonight for the first time in almost a year after lockdowns forced bidding online. And all eyes will be on a small Goldie oil painting expected to set you back about the same price as an apartment. Yes, you heard that right. This tiny painting could sell for up to $600,000. Richard Thompson is the director of the International Arts Centre and the auctioneer. As he dusts off his hammer for a 6 p.m. kick-off, I asked him about his expectations.
Well, it's just a lovely little small one. Of course, we've sold them for close to $2 million at auction, several of them now, but this one is only 20 by 15 centimetres, so it's one of the very small ones that he did, a real darling. Estimated at $400,000 to $600,000, could sit anywhere from $500,000 upwards. We don't really know.
Wow, so the price of an apartment.
Well, the price of an apartment outside of Auckland anyway.
Can you describe it to our listeners, please?
Well, it's a very intricate, small portrait of an Arawa chieftainess, and her name is Rakapa. The painting was called Memories. Goldie did it, painted it in 1910, so it's an early work. It's in beautiful condition. The original price was £262 back in 1910, so that was a fairly hefty sum back then. But tonight, yeah, I mean the value of Goldie paintings has increased exponentially over the past sort of 20 years, and they've become an absolute commodity.
And it's in an original frame, is that right, Richard?
Yeah, well, his father used to own the sawmill, the Partington sawmill in Auckland, and they were a very interesting family indeed. In fact, they made all those frames for Goldie, and they were made of kauri, so they were beautiful kauri frames with the black sort of varnish that they had on them. So they were quite unique. You can tell a Goldie frame from a long way off.
And does that make it worth more?
Well, it can add value having something like that in its original frame. It's not always the case with every artist, but I think with Goldie in particular, it's lovely to have those original Goldie frames because no other artist in the world ever had anything like them.
What can you tell us about its recent history? Has it been up for sale?
It was purchased from us in 2013, so it's been in private collection for 10 years. Prior to that, it was owned by V. Donald of Masterton, and he was a very prominent collector at the time. I remember dealing with them back then, and he'd purchased it in England, I believe. Somehow it had ended up in England in the 1940s.
If you were a betting man, do you reckon it's going to go offshore?
It won't go offshore. It's unlikely. Most of the Goldies we sell stay onshore. If you want to export a Goldie now, you have to apply for an export licence through the Ministry of Culture and Heritage. So right. It is a process, and more of these national treasures are being held back, particularly ones of this sort of significance. So it seems to me unusual that an overseas buyer will bid on it. But it is possible, and they would have applied for an application prior, no doubt, because it's not something that's straightforward, getting something like this out of the country.
Right, so anything up to $600,000, you're thinking. So clearly the cost of living crisis hasn't hit the art world.
Well, I think, it's a safe place with people with money to put their money into good paintings and good art. I mean, there's no question that art is something that holds its value, whereas there's so many other markets that are very fickle at the moment, and art they can become family heirlooms and be sold decades later. And like this one, for example, originally £262. Had they kept it since, from those original days, that would be a great family heirloom for someone, wouldn't it?
Richard, have you seen a shift more towards art as an investment, given sort of the uncertainty of the markets, currency fluctuations, inflation and all that's going on in the world? Are more people turning to art as an investment?
That's a global thing, yes, and particularly good art like this, good quality pieces, not just paintings. We're talking about quality artworks, the top end of the market. I mean, last year we did close to $22 million at auction turnover, International Arts Centre, but prior to that, prior to COVID days, we were doing 10 to sort of 12, 15 million on a good year. So the growth has been huge, even though some of the auctions we've been having have been virtual. Tonight's one's the first one we've had people back in the room since August last year. And if you remember August last year, we had a huge auction one night. And then that evening, the country was closed up for close to 3 months.
Wow, so it's going to be quite special.
Oh, it's nice to have people back in the room. As an auctioneer, it's always fun to have people in the room. I mean, I've got so used to people not being in the room and having virtual auctions that it would be it's nice to welcome them all back. Any
idea how many people might be interested in this piece?
Oh, there's always interest in Goldie paintings. We've probably got at least a dozen people registered to bid, I would imagine. We've got over sort of 600 or 700 registrations for the auction overall. I mean, there's close to $4 million worth of paintings coming up tonight.
Hey, Richard, would you rather have this Goldie or a $600,000 apartment?
Depends. I think, from a monetary or an investment point of view, I'd probably have the Goldie. But it depends where the $600,000 apartment is.
Richard Thompson there, the auctioneer. Some of your feedback now on the National Adaptation Plan. This person says start building on stilts above ground. Calvin congratulates James Shaw, saying well done, fantastic. Another person says this is on the retreat policy coming next year. Great, a whole year to worry about it. Thanks, Greens, for turning on the anxiety fire hose. Another listener says if flooding is such a serious concern, why are we still building in Papamoa and the Mount? And another compliment for James Shaw. Climate Minister James Shaw has worked tirelessly to effect climate change mitigation. The Labour government has been slow to get on board and hindered progress. Other side of the coin, this person says, very disappointing. The Minister didn't have any answers to your questions. Sounds like yet another report with no substance. On the subject of cats going walkabout in the National Park on leads, with little coats on too. This person says taking cats for nature walks is all over Instagram. Yeah, but most of them American, I think, from looking at it. Uncle Mike's got in touch to say we've had people bringing cats to seabird colonies. Unbelievable. And Jennifer says leave your cats at home in their little kitty beds.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko iwi Ashton tēnei. Climate Change Minister James Shaw says the government will figure out who pays the costs of adapting to climate change as it goes. The government's National Adaptation Plan, published today, lays out its priorities for the next 6 years. Mr Shaw told Checkpoint the government would start by looking at insurance for the risk of flooding.
As we deal with that, we'll then be learning lessons that we can apply to other forms of climate-related risk as well, such as droughts and fires and so on. So part of this will kind of land in the insurance industry, part of it will land at central government. Often the things that are most closest in time, central government tends to pick up the tab.
James Shaw says the next steps include a climate adaptation plan for health. New Zealand's had its wettest July since records began. NIWA has released its monthly climate summary. Rowan Quinn reports.
Rain and floods caused havoc last month, with homes flooded and roads blocked or washed away in several parts of the country. NIWA says rainfall levels for the country were 149% higher than normal, although Gisborne and Hawke's Bay were drier than usual. It was also a very warm July, the fourth warmest since records began. Temperatures were 1.3 degrees above average, with parts of Auckland, the Waikato region and Gisborne having their hottest Julys ever.
The National Party says New Zealanders are going backwards under the Labour government as new figures show wage growth trailing inflation. The latest data out today puts wage growth over the year to June at either 3.4% or 6.4%, depending on the measure. Both numbers, though, lag behind price inflation at 7.3% over the same period. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon says families are being let down by a government without a proper plan for addressing the cost of living crisis.
This government now has presided over 8 quarters, 2 years of inflation outstripping wage growth, and that means that all Kiwis are going backwards, sadly, across New Zealand.
The jobless rate has also bumped up from 3.2% to 3.3% in the 3 months to June. A group of Māori health providers hope access to a shared pregnancy data system will help give Pepe Māori the best start in life. The National Hauora Coalition's dashboard shares data across providers and networks. It includes access to an already widely used program called the Best Start Pregnancy Tool, which rolled out in 2019. Clinical Director Rawiri McCree-Jansen says the anonymised data includes information on vaccinations and other important records.
If we do a good job of that, then we get less whooping cough admissions to hospital in the first year. Might also be making sure that we're referring women if they're exposed to domestic violence issues, and making sure that we're prescribing the right medicines to support them being healthy during their pregnancy.
Rawiri McCree-Jansen says it will help to monitor mothers and give providers access to best practice. A landlord says the government's $6 million crime prevention fund is a drop in the bucket. The Takanini town centre in Auckland has been hit by ram raiders 12 times in the past year. Back in May, the then Police Minister, Poto Williams, announced a $6 million fund to help small businesses hit by ram raiders. Takanini town centre landlord, Bruce Wallace, says it would probably cost $1 million to fund security measures just for the town centre.
I think the $6 million fund really is just a political announcement to say we acknowledge it wouldn't address the problem. Like I said here, we've probably seen a 300% increase this year as opposed to maybe 18 months to 2 years ago.
Bruce Wallace says the lack of clarity around the funding is concerning. A liquor store in Auckland has been targeted by ram raiders for the third time in recent months. A car ploughed into the Royal Oak Liquor Centre about 3 o'clock in the morning. The police caught 3 offenders at the scene and 2 nearby. In total, 5 youths aged between 12 and 15 have been referred to Youth Aid on charges of burglary and the unlawful taking of a motor vehicle. A man who crashed his car while speeding and driving aggressively, causing the death of his 6-year-old son, has been sentenced to 5 years in jail. Nicholas Gebhardt pleaded guilty to the motor manslaughter of his son Lachlan in Rangiora in 2019 and was today sentenced in the High Court in Christchurch. In sentencing, Justice Jan-Marie Doog said Gebhardt had driven in an aggressive and highly deliberate manner and crashed into a stop bank with no sign of evasive action or braking. Gebhardt was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and disqualified from driving for 7 years after he's released from prison. Another ward in Southland Hospital has been closed to visitors due to an increase in COVID-19 exposure events. A spokesperson for Te Whatuora Southern says visiting is now temporarily suspended for the surgical ward. On Monday, visiting was suspended for the assessment, treatment and rehabilitation ward. Visitors are still allowed for the rest of the hospital between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. However, they'll be screened at the door and have to wear a surgical mask for their entire visit. Each patient can only have 2 nominated visitors per stay, with only 1 visit per day. And British researchers looking into claims that digital devices can wreck memory skills have found the opposite is true. They found that storing trivial information like shopping lists and phone numbers on digital devices frees up the mind for more interesting or valuable tasks. To sport, and Greymouth's Paul Cole is determined to go one better than 4 years ago and to win gold at the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. The world number 2 will play Welshman Joel Macon in the final of the men's squash singles. Cole won silver at the Gold Coast Games and told Sky Sport this match has been on his mind for 4 years.
Man, I'm absolutely up for it. I've been, thinking about this moment for 4 years. I'll be all blacked out tomorrow representing New Zealand, and, I just got to, stay focused, stay on my game, and, I'm feeling really good about it. Mentally, I'm in a great space, and physically, I'm 100%.
Also on the squash court, Joelle King plays Sarah Jane Perry of England for the women's bronze. Mountain bikers Sam Gaze, the 2018 gold medalist, and Ben Oliver are in action later tonight. While in the pool, Lewis Clareburt is chasing a hat-trick of gold medals when he lines up in the 200-metre medley. David Letty will be looking to defend his weightlifting title, while shot putter Maddie Wershie and high jumper Hamish Kerr are also strong medal contenders. Kiwis 5/8 Te Maire Martin has signed a 3-year deal with the Warriors. Martin is currently with the Brisbane Broncos. And a British government report has found Manchester United footballers Cristiano Ronaldo and Harry Maguire are the most abused Premier League players on Twitter. And Argentina, Chile, Uruguay and Paraguay have submitted a joint bid to host the 2030 Football World Cup. If successful, it would bring the tournament back to Uruguay a century after it hosted the inaugural World Cup in 1930. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Lisa Alder on giving up a career in palliative care for book selling. In fact, she's the winner of this year's Best Emerging Bookseller Award. Nick Tipping celebrates the Taranaki jazz scene. Kevin Clark's motorcycle diary, Baghdad or Bust, is this week's Hump Prize, while author and journalist David Cohen takes us on a musical tour of Ireland. Turns out Van Morrison isn't so grumpy these days. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. From Northland to Waikato, including Bay of Plenty, partly cloudy, isolated showers mainly in the east clearing tomorrow, areas of fog tomorrow morning. From Waipomo to Manawatu, including the central high country, scattered rain easing to isolated showers in the evening and becoming mostly fine tomorrow. From Horowhenua to Wellington, including Wairarapa, mainly fine, the odd shower in Horowhenua this afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud clearing tonight, possible shower or two in Gisborne. Fine weather for Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. For Otago and Southland, showers about the south coast clearing this evening. High cloud tomorrow with possible rain around midday in Southland, Clutha, Otago Lakes and Dakiura, Stewart Island. Bulla and Westland, scattered showers clearing this evening but returning to Westland tomorrow. Showers are forecast for Fiordland, turning to rain tomorrow, some heavy and thundery falls possible. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, a few showers until this evening. It's 9 minutes past 6. I'll update you with the latest news headlines at 6:30.
Nā mihi eho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. China has intensified its warnings over US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. China's military is planning live fire drills in areas that appear to infringe on Taiwan's territorial waters. Pelosi's visit is viewed by China as a provocation and an infringement on its sovereignty. Experts say China's threats and military drills aren't likely to prompt Taiwan or the United States to intervene, but they say China could keep up the pressure on Taiwan for a long time after Nancy Pelosi departs. The ABC's Stephanie Smale reports.
As political tensions swirled and China's military exercised its power, the United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi pushed ahead, addressing Taiwan's parliament.
We commend Taiwan for being one of the freest societies in the world. Now we look forward to our conversation about how we can work together. We thank you for your leadership. We want the world to recognize that.
China's response has been swift and furious, with warplanes approaching the line dividing the Taiwan Strait. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Clinton administration, Susan Shirk, says it's a volatile situation.
The threats coming from Beijing's side made everyone worried, including me, that Xi Jinping might act rashly and we would face a real risk of a military confrontation across the strait.
But she's not concerned the flurry of military gestures prompted by the visit will spill into more serious territory.
My hunch is that what we will see is a lot of dramatic military activity from China's part that looks great on China's central television. that makes Xi Jinping look very good in the eyes of the Chinese public, but nothing that really aims at interfering with her visit in a way that would require some military response on the part of the United States or Taiwan.
George Yin from the Centre for China Studies at the National Taiwan University explained there has been some excitement in Taiwan about the visit. But he says there's also concern the repercussions for Taiwan could drag on well after Nancy Pelosi's departure.
Right now, the military exercise would only last for 3 days, but who knows how long it would actually go on, and not just the military exercise, but but a whole series of actions aimed at punishing Taiwan for hosting Nancy Pelosi. It may not just be 3 days. It could be 3 weeks. It could be 3 months.
He describes the response from the Taiwanese government so far as calm.
The official statement from the Department of Defense merely states that Taiwan will remain vigilant and Taiwan will be careful. But that's about it. The Taiwanese government right now very much attempted to try to de-escalate the situation, to not, to basically say and do as little, as possible in order to avoid provoking China.
The Taiwan tensions have sparked questions about what Australia's involvement might need to be if things take a turn for the worse. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has reiterated Australia's position of not recognising Taiwan as a country, although it promotes economic, trade and cultural interests.
Australia has a bipartisan one-China policy, and we have a bipartisan view about discouraging unilateral changes to the status quo.
She's urging calm.
It's really important that we all continue to calmly assert the importance of peace and stability, and to urge all parties to contribute to de-escalating tension.
Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong ending that report by Stephanie Smale. In the US state of Arizona, a poll is underway that could reveal how much power Donald Trump still has within the Republican Party. Voters have been choosing the Republican nominees for November's general elections, with a clear choice between candidates who stand by Donald Trump and those who want to chart a different course. The BBC's Anthony Zerka reports.
Mike Pence did an incredible job. And I'm getting a lot of credit because that's really my first hire.
2 years ago, Donald Trump and Mike Pence were presidential ticket mates. But this was last week during separate speaking events at opposite ends of Washington, D.C.
I don't know that the president and I differ on issues, but we may differ on focus.
Then I ran a second time and I did much better. We got millions and millions more votes.
It's absolutely essential at a time when so many Americans are hurting. We don't give way to the temptation to look back.
You know what? That's going to be a story for a long time. What a disgrace it was.
And the week before in Arizona, they were campaigning for different Republican candidates running to be the state's next governor.
We have some critically important elections coming up, starting with the next governor of Arizona, Kari Lake.
Trump's pick is a former television news presenter who echoes the former president's unfounded claims of widespread 2020 election fraud.
It's game over. It's game over for those spineless politicians who stood by. They did nothing as our elections were stolen from us. You are right. Trump won. You're right.
Here in Prescott Valley, Arizona, it feels like less of a rally for Donald Trump's chosen candidates and more of a rally about Donald Trump's political future. Thousands of supporters queued up in the Arizona sun to show their support. They wore T-shirts claiming that Donald Trump actually won in 2020 and that he should run again. Now, Donald Trump is here endorsing candidates. Does Donald Trump's endorsement carry some water for you on that?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely planning to vote Republican. I'll be voting for whoever Trump endorses.
That kind of is the seal of approval for you?
Yeah, it is. I could do research all day long, but the internet lies. So if Donald Trump is saying that they're a good person, that's pretty much all I need to hear.
Please join me in welcoming Vice President Mike Pence.
2 hours south, near Phoenix, Trump's former number 2 was holding an event for the only Republican during a recent governor's debate not to claim the 2020 election was stolen.
there is only one candidate in this race who will be ready on day one, and that's Karen Taylor Robson.
This isn't the first time Pence has been on opposite ends of a primary election from Trump, but it is the first time they have campaigned in the same state on the same day.
Think about all that we accomplished together. We confirmed Justice Neil Gorsuch, Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
The challenge for the former vice president, who has his own presidential ambitions, is to define himself as distinct from Trump while still touting the accomplishments of the Trump-Pence administration.
There's fury in Italy after a Nigerian street seller was beaten to death in broad daylight. The attack was filmed and the video shows bystanders failing to intervene. It's also raised questions about the rise of anti-immigrant rhetoric in Italy. World Watch's Max Toll has more.
Aliku Ogochukwu, who was 39, was selling handkerchiefs in an eastern town on Friday when he was chased down and beaten to death. The footage, captured by a member of the public, is disturbing and shows the man being punched and choked. None of those who witnessed the broad daylight attack appeared to intervene, although cries of "stop, stop," and "you are killing him" can be heard. Local police are critical.
We condemn this person, but we also condemn the indifference of those who watched and did nothing.
It's not precisely known what the attacker's motive was, but a 32-year-old Italian man named Filippo Folazzo has been arrested on suspicion of murder and robbery. One police officer has suggested Mr. Folazzo took umbrage at he and his wife being repeatedly asked for spare change. Dozens of local Africans took to the streets of the town over the weekend to protest, and further demonstrations are planned. Mr. Ogochukwu's wife says her family has lived in Italy for almost a decade and that her husband has never sought any trouble.
I need justice for my husband. That is what I want. I need justice because it's too much. The pain is too much.
Not revenge.
The pain is too much for me. I need justice.
The attack has also prompted discussion in Italy about its connection to the rise of anti-immigrant rhetoric, largely from far-right politicians. As Italians head to the polls once more in September, there is a frontrunner, Giorgia Meloni of the Brothers in Italy party, which is firmly anti-immigrant. Bellamy Ogak is an Italian African activist for social justice.
In my opinion, the fact that nobody tried to intervene is a sign that nobody saw themselves in that man. Because had there been a white person perceived to be Italian, I personally doubt that things would have ended up that way. And that, in my opinion, is due to the fact, to the political propaganda and to the narrative that the media have been spreading.
The leader of a right-wing populist party in Italy and former Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini says security in his country has no colour. That's a comment Bellamy Ogak says is laughable.
First of all, he is the one who associated colour to security in Italy with the implementation of the security decree in 2017. So he was the one who legally, or I should say politically, made immigrant people and undocumented people in Italy associated to a threat to national security.
As well as handkerchiefs, Aliku Ogochukwu sold small things on the street, like lighters and tissue paper. He commuted every day by bicycle from his home in the small village of San Severino Marche to the larger coastal town of Civitanova Marche, a single journey of close to 3 hours.
It's 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In a court case in the US, parents of a child killed in the 2012 Sandy Hook school massacre have testified that their child did actually exist. The heart-wrenching statements were made during a lawsuit against American conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who has claimed that the shooting was a hoax. Jones told a jury he never intended to hurt the child's parents, but insists his comments were taken out of context. CNN's Miguel Marquez says the parents are seeking up to $250 million from Jones.
My son existed.
My son existed, says Scarlett Lewis, the mother of 6-year-old Jesse Lewis, speaking directly to conspiracy theorist Alex Jones in an Austin, Texas courtroom.
Jesse was real. I am a real mom.
In an utterly unthinkable sign of our times, Scarlett Lewis makes the case that she and her dead child are real, directly to Jones.
It doesn't exist, that I'm deep state. It's just not true. I know you know that. That's the problem. I know you know that. And you keep saying it. You keep saying it. Why? Why? For money? Because you've made a lot of money while you've said it. I know I know you believe me. And yet you're gonna leave this courthouse and you're gonna say it again on your show. You're saying no, you just did it.
On his show today, he raised questions about both Scarlett Lewis and the boy's father, who are seeking up to $150 million in damages.
He is being manipulated by some very bad people. But I'll just say, because I gotta be honest, he's slow, okay? And his ex-wife is not.
Dutch farmers have been making headlines around the world for their protests against climate change measures. Tractors have rolled up outside Parliament, blocked supermarket distribution centres and turned up at politicians' homes. Agriculture accounts for nearly half of the Netherlands' nitrogen emissions, but farmers say the government's plan to cut the emissions to meet climate targets unfairly impacts their sector. The BBC's Anna Holligan reports. Jenny?
It's a beautiful sunny day. Swallows are dipping in and out of this dairy farm barn.
At the moment we have 116 cows.
Geert-Jan Kloosterboer is the farmer here.
I'm the third generation on this one.
This proud farming nation is under intense pressure.
This area needs to have a plan to reduce nitrogen. We don't know what our future will be and what we have to do to stay farmers for the future.
And it's this nagging sense of uncertainty which has driven some farmers to use their tractors as tools of protest. When you see the type of action that we've witnessed this week, the setting fire to hay bales on the highways, protesters turning up outside ministers' homes to intimidate them. Do you think this is helpful for the farmers' campaign?
No, this is not helpful, but I can understand them. In the soccer club you have the executive box, normal stage, but also some hooligans. And they have all the same love for their own club. But they express it on their own ways. And that is also what the farmers in Holland will do.
Hi. Hi. Caroline van der Plas is the leader of the BBB, the Farmer Citizen Movement. Things are going well for you. A relatively new party, which is currently witnessing a surge in the polls.
Every day I think, what the F is happening here?
How has it got to this point?
What they're doing, they're crying out to the government, please help us. You can see that the Dutch people are getting more and more angry. We want the whole nitrogen policy and plans that are on the table right now, we want to put a hold on that and try to look for other solutions. Be careful what you wish for, because when the farmers are gone, they are not going to come back. If we depend on imports, you see it with gas from Russia, then we have a big problem.
It's like something from the history books, a so-called baby hatch that allows people to anonymously drop off infants that they're unable to care for. 15 years ago, a hospital in Tokyo became the only place in Japan where a child could be anonymously and safely abandoned. Critics say it encourages irresponsible behaviour by parents, but a child who was once left there says he's grateful that the so-called baby hatch exists. Deutsche Welle's Clifford Coonan has this story.
Student Koichi Miyatsu was just a bewildered toddler when his mother placed him in the hatch at Jikei Hospital in southern Japan's Kumamoto. He still keeps the things he was wearing on that day. For 15 years now, the clinic has been the only place in Japan where a child can be anonymously and safely abandoned by desperate family members. The day I was left there was the day a new chapter of my life began. I think it was good that I was given to the baby hatch. Because I was given to the hatch, I met my current parents and now can live like this. I'm grateful for it. I owe what I am today to the baby hatch. GK Hospital sees the hatch as a way to prevent child abuse and deaths in Japan, where police recorded 27 child abandonments in 2020. At least 57 children died from abuse the year before. GK's head doctor says children abandoned at the hospital include those who were the result of prostitution, rape and incest. The mothers have nowhere else to turn. There are women out there who are ashamed that they did something horrible by getting pregnant and are so scared. For these women, a place like ours, which makes them think even I will be welcome, counts a lot, I think. The Catholic-run hospital opened its baby hatch in 2007, modelled on a German scheme. In all, 161 babies and toddlers have been dropped at the hospital. Some people have criticised the baby hatch for undermining the right of children to know their origins. Others say it encourages the abandonment of children. But for Koichi Miyatsu, the hatch was a lifesaver. I may still be missing a few pieces to understand who I am. My life before the baby hatch was important, but my life after the hatch is far more important. Years later, he learned more about his origins, including that his biological mother was killed in a car accident 5 months after his birth. He keeps a framed picture of her. Now Koichi wants to give something back. Every month he provides free meals to underprivileged children at a local church. He wants to work with children in the future and perhaps become a foster parent too.
And let's get to some of your feedback now before we head off. Someone's got in touch about the interview we did about the Goldie painting that's being auctioned tonight. Nicola says, I'm not sure that Goldies are allowed to leave Aotearoa. They're Tonga, and I believe, could you please check and report to us all? Don't know if you heard, Nicola, in that interview, the auctioneer addressed that. If you wanted to take it out of the country, you have to apply for basically a permit in order to do that. And he said nobody had registered to go through that process, so it's likely to be a local buyer. On the subject of the National Adaptation Plan, this is for climate change. Someone's got in touch to say the answer to who pays is pretty simple. We all pay. Who caused climate change? We all did. The longer it takes to do anything, the more we will all pay. And Mary says, I've been concerned for years about the new builds in areas that are susceptible to climate change. They are going up in the hundreds. I can't believe that they're still going up. If we are going to see things kicking off in another few years, so too does the escalation of costs, both financially and emotionally. We need action and details yesterday. And this one says, not the role of the government, you and me, taxpayers, to bail out people who can't get insurance due to climate change. If they bought in the last 15 years at least. Climate change isn't news. A buyer beware, they say. And another listener says managed retreat is a good start. They're not baking a cake and they can't come up with a fully finished product at this stage. Now, the late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. And ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up, Deputy Prime Minister and Sports Minister Grant Robertson joins First Up live from Birmingham. Oh, I wonder what sport he's competing in. Lewis Clareburt will be swimming for a trio of golds.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Climate Change Minister James Shaw says the government will figure out who pays the costs of adapting to climate change as it goes, and the government would start by looking at insurance for the risk of flooding. NIWA's monthly climate summary shows New Zealand's had its wettest July since records began. And the first grain ship to have sailed from a Ukrainian-controlled port since Russia invaded in February faces a critical inspection today in Turkish waters. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This morning on First Up, journalist, poet and author Muhammad Hassan talked about the racial profiling that Muslims still face in this country.
I got stopped when I was in New Zealand, for example, at also an airport. That was 3 hours, having every item in my bag taken out and then being questioned extensively. This is an overwhelming experience for a lot of Muslims.
And the world reacts to the killing of Al-Qaeda's leader in Kabul.
The first country to actually come out and say, good job, was Saudi Arabia. Obviously, the Americans are tooting their own horn. The Taliban, who are now the Afghan government, in effect, effect. Not so happy about this, to be honest.
Download First Up the podcast or join me, Nathan Rauder, live from 5 weekday mornings on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Nathan, and I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. My first guest is a talented bookseller. Not a younger one, because she's been around for a while. I hope she doesn't mind me saying that, but she has worked quite a long time in palliative care. But she obviously loves books, and she's so good at selling them, having changed her career recently, that she's won the Emerging Bookseller Award for 2022. Her name is Lisa Adler, and she joins me after the news at 7. In this half hour, well, later on, Johnny Blades has our latest report on the inner workings of Parliament. But first off, the Commonwealth Games, as you no doubt have noticed, are on. We're winning lots of gold medals, silver medals, bronze medals. Everyone's loving the Commonwealth again. But what is the Commonwealth? And why do we still have the Commonwealth Games? Indeed, why do we still have a Commonwealth?
In the 92 years since the first Commonwealth Games, or as they were known then, the Empire Games, many countries have seized their own sovereignty. They've become republics. They've moved away from the colonial power, which, let's be clear, these games were created to celebrate. And yet, still they persist. So today on the programme, Otago Daily Times sports editor Hayden Meikle and commentator Phil Gifford, who first covered the games in 1970, cast their minds over this strange, anachronistic celebration of sport. They explain why they are still relevant, why they're still fun, and what function they serve in a post-imperial world. Phil Gifford, welcome back to The Detail. Great to have you here.
Yeah, lovely to be here.
I was talking to a friend, Phil, about the Commonwealth Games, and they rather uncharitably described it as the shitty Olympics. Tell me why this friend is wrong, if you would.
Well, first of all, you're not the only person with friends that aren't crazy about the Commonwealth Games. My mate Peter Fitzsimons from the Sydney Morning Herald, who of course is the head of the Australian Republican Party, calls them the Colonial Games. And John Oliver, the acerbic British comedian, has said, how can you take a thing seriously where the best sprinters are from Wales?
Well, imagine the Olympics without the United States, China and Russia. Then imagine a track meet dominated by sprinters from Wales. And you have the Commonwealth Games.
Despite all of that, I still love the Commonwealth Games. And yes, I know they are. Of course they're weird. I mean, it's kind of like saying, let's have a big sporting event where only countries whose name ends in the letter A are allowed to compete, sort of thing. It's as random as that. But the reason I love the Commonwealth Games is because they give a chance, I think, to a lot of very, very good athletes, and I'd use that in the broader sense of the word, from lawn bowls to track and field, to actually compete against other people that are not mugs. Look, okay, yes, there are some areas where patently the best in the world are not there, but there is something about the Commonwealth Games that is, I suppose, homely is the word I would use, and that's the reason I've always enjoyed them and still do.
They are what they are.
Hayden Meikle is the sports editor of the Otago Daily Times.
They don't pretend to be the Olympics. They're not the Olympics. They don't pretend to be anything other than what they are. Once every 4 years, a slightly unusual, anachronistic, weird gathering of random sports, which is only getting more and more random every 4 years. It's strange, it's weird, but it's kind of fun. And can't sport just be like that occasionally? Isn't that okay?
Go and have a look at some of the things where they are the best in the world, like the rugby sevens, for example. Dare I mention it, given that we finished third in both of them, but that's by the by.
The final whistle has gone, and we have been treated to a match worthy of a gold medal contest here. New Zealand take bronze in Birmingham.
Or maybe go and look at some of the swimming events where you've got a Kiwi, Lewis Clarebart, who would appear to be the best in the world at the moment.
15 metres to swim. Clarebart putting in the big ones. They go to the line. It's gold for Lewis Clarebart.
and he's winning a gold medal, which is pretty inspiring. Maybe look at the triathlon, even though we had the bizarre business of the disqualification of Hayden Wild.
So Hayden Wild makes a turn for home. He is in the lead. Is he aware of the penalty? Who knows? But for now, Hayden Wild of New Zealand...
But look, there are some events where the people are absolutely world-class. There are other competitors. But look, to be fair, think of Eddie the Eagle. He was an English ski jumper, which was insane. And I mean, he jumped about half as far as the other guys, and he became famous, the poor bloke, because like Evel Knievel, who crashed all the time, the American stuntman from back in the day, Eddie the Eagle, he flew for a little while and then he'd always crash land. You know, that was his stock and trade. And he became a national hero in the UK. Should he have been at the Winter Olympics? Yeah, of course he should have. He was the best in England. Is England world famous in the Olympics for actually the ski jumping? Hell no, because they don't have any mountains there.
You look at the Olympic Games and in its frenzied sort of bid for relevance, there's that word again, and of course for the almighty dollar, busy adding in all sorts of bizarre things. I think, am I right in saying breakdancing is at the next Olympic Games? Heavens above. The Commonwealth Games, yep, they've introduced some bits and pieces. I don't know if I'm in love with 3-on-3 basketball. I'd like to have traditional basketball, but then basketball's at the Olympics and there's also a basketball World Cup. There's plenty of basketball happening, so perhaps that one does make sense. But no, netball's good. Bowls, of course, we have a massive history with bowls at the Commonwealth Games, and mock it all you like, ye Philistines, but bowls is a big part of this country and a fine sport, and weirdly entertaining television. Yeah. If you've ever watched it, it can be really a bit like darts, I suppose, really interesting to watch. So, look, I think the choice of sports is broadly rather grand, and of course we win at lots of them, so that helps.
Compared to the Commonwealth Games, I find the Olympics, even though I thrill when wonderful people like Valerie Adams win gold there, but the Olympics is so bloated and so grubby and so much money's involved in actually getting them to your city and so on and so forth. And the Olympics has things like breakdancing. Now, I'm not knocking breakdancing because the young people that are breakdancers are, in their own way, incredible athletes. But if you can have breakdancing at the Olympics, why can't you have lawn bowls at the Commonwealth Games?
I know what you mean when you say that. There is a slightly distasteful aura surrounding the Olympics, isn't there? I mean, the Commonwealth Games are different in that you don't get this sort of... It's not like a proxy for geopolitical warfare. And, I mean, even when people drugs cheat at the Commonwealth Games, I'm not so much outraged as I am sort of like, oh, really? At the Commonwealth Games?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Olympics have been obscene ever since they took them to Berlin in 1936 and Hitler was there giving Nazi salutes to when Germans won events. You know, the Olympics has been corrupt at the highest level forever. That's just the harsh reality. But exactly as you say, Emil, while the Olympics, there's just something that's a little bit cringy about them because of the fact that they are the plaything of incredible mega powers, whereas the Commonwealth Games, again, it has a tiny hint to me. And ever since I was lucky enough to go to the first Com Games that I went to was in 1970 in Edinburgh as a journalist, I've got to say that I'd been to the Mexico Olympics 2 years before in 1968. I was there when Tommy Smith and John Carlos did their Black Power protest after the 200 metres final. And even then, there was such a massive difference between the sort of almost humbleness of the Commonwealth Games and the friendliness of the Commonwealth Games. I know it sounds cliched, but it's actually a fact. And the enormous thing that the Olympics already were by 1968.
You mentioned that the first Commonwealth Games that you covered was in 1970, so presumably you were there when we hosted the Commonwealth Games in 1974.
Yeah, absolutely. The Games in Christchurch were just one of the, I hesitate to use the word lovely about a sports event, but it was. It was just something that was fantastic about it, you know. And track and field was sort of the superstar sport at the 1974 Commonwealth Games. And it started with, of course, Dick Taylor winning the 10,000 metres on the first day at the track at QE2.
Black undoubtedly has a chance if he's got anything left, but Taylor's the man going away. Black can't go. And it looks like the first gold in the track events for New Zealand. And
that was an extraordinary achievement because, amongst other people, he beat a guy from England called David Bedford, who at the time was the world record holder. So at that stage, the track actually, particularly with in middle distances, with the African nations especially, and some of the British runners as well, track was really seriously top ranked then. So it started on the first day of track and field with Dick Taylor winning the 10,000 metres, and it finished with probably the greatest 1,500 metres race there's ever been in the world, where Philbert Bayi from Tanzania won the gold medal and broke the world record, and John Walker from New Zealand, of course, now Sir John Walker finished second, and he also broke what had been the current world record.
Hayden Meikle also brought up this race in his piece about the Commonwealth Games in the ODT last week. Meikle asked a select group of sporting luminaries about their favourite Games moments, and one of the responses he got was from the chief executive of the Otago Highlanders, Roger Clark.
He was living in Wellington as a kid, and he and his wee cousin, I think, were taken by their nana from Wellington down to Christchurch for the 1974 Commonwealth Games. As mentioned, a massive moment in New Zealand sport. And Roger wrote these lovely memories of watching, it was called the Race of the Century or Race of the Lifetime at the time, the 1,500 metres final. So John Walker, and, you know, you've probably seen the clips or seen the photos or heard about it. You know, John Walker, he made your heart sing. He had the long hair, he ran beautifully. And he was, of course, in a great battle with Philbert Bayi, the legendary runner who sadly would miss the Olympics 2 years later. And Roger wrote about the effect that amazing race had on him. But really pointedly, he talked about the next day, him and his cousin went out running. And I've heard that story a lot from people, that the jogging craze and the running craze, it really spikes after an event like that. And that's, I think, these are fun events. These are sporting events when it boils down to they're a glorious, trivial pursuit. But it does have an effect. You know, a little boy watches a runner and he goes out the next day and starts running. So when you are at that age and things do imprint on you so much easier, they stick with you. And that's fine. I do think of kids, hopefully, whether it's on TikTok highlights or live coverage or reading the newspaper, my goodness, they're seeing things in Birmingham that might be striking a chord with them. I think of a swimmer watching Lewis Clareburt, or Sophie Pascoe, or any of these swimmers in the pool, or a cyclist. Imagine a cyclist watching these amazing black-clad New Zealand cyclists tearing up the track. They do have an impact. They do have a transformative impact on sport, and that's quite nice.
Very close to the world record. Bayi wins. Walker next, Jimco next, Dixon next, and the world record has been taken.
I want to go back to the 1974 Games. What was the vibe? What was the atmosphere surrounding us holding the Games then? Was it, was there a palpable sense of expectation and excitement in the country?
Oddly enough, not really. And it took Taylor's 10,000 metres to set those games alight. But once that happened, then I think everybody in New Zealand went absolutely crazy on it. Look, I've got to share with you how we got those games. I've happened by accident to be a little bit of a witness to how that came about, because there was a guy called Ron Scott, later Sir Ron Scott, who's now passed away, and he was basically the lobbyist for Christchurch to get those games. And I first met him at the Mexico City Olympics in 1968 when he was wining and dining delegates from the Commonwealth. And then we fast forward to 1970 at Edinburgh, where I was working for New Zealand Press Association again. And Ron and his team from Christchurch, they had a suite at the United Services Hotel, which is a very grand old hotel in the main street of Edinburgh. And I always remember going in the first time there, and they were, there was a lot of hospitality, but they had floor to ceiling, and they were very high ceilings, a huge wall of crates of beer, cartons of beer. So that was that. And then they had the most extraordinary, which I was at just briefly, they had the most extraordinary reception, and it wasn't at the hotel, it was at a function room somewhere, for the delegates, because Melbourne were competing with Christchurch for the 74 Games, and it always, in those days, it got announced at the previous Games, which in this case, 1970, Edinburgh. Anyway, the party was quite extraordinary. Now, it may be an urban myth, but I have heard that they actually had to check under all the tables at the reception at breakfast time and drag out one of the delegates and put him into a taxi and get him to the committee meeting to make the vote, and Melbourne didn't do any of that sort of stuff. Melbourne just believed, little Christchurch, they've got no chance. Oh, sorry, I'm doing a bad Australian accent. Melbourne believed Christchurch had no chance and didn't really turn on the charm, much less the celebrations and the libations. But Melbourne got 2 votes.